Thank you very much to Mr. Fogh Rasmussen. Thank you very much to Secretary General Stoltenberg. It's wonderful to hear a former head of NATO and the current head of NATO do a little tete-a-tete. I'm only slightly worried, though, that Mr. Fogh Rasmussen is going to take my job because he's a very tough interviewer, and yeah, he might be angling for editor-in-chief of Politico, perhaps. We've heard a lot from politicians and freedom fighters this morning. Now we'd like to shift to the world of business. Please allow me to introduce your next moderator, Rachel Samran, who is a responsible business advisor and will be taking the next panel. Rachel.
Thank you, Jamil, for that warm welcome. We have, of course, this morning, and we will be for the rest of the day and tomorrow, focused very much on the need for all of us to stand up to authoritarianism. And the business world is no exception in that regard. But the global business world is intertwined, and the private sector, as well global trade, autocracy, are all locked together to a very large extent. So as the political dividing lines between democracies and autocracies are sharpened, how does that impact business? And how do businesses balance this new geopolitical reality? With me to discuss those topics today are Wolfgang Niedermark, member of the executive board of the Federation of German Industries, Jannicke Nilsson, executive vice president, safety, security and sustainability at Equinor, the Norway headquartered international energy company present in 30 countries around the world, and Carsten Sjoerup, executive vice president at CentralNIC, a leading provider of internet infrastructure services. Very warm welcome to you all. A warm welcome also to the audience with us online, and I would like to remind everyone, of course, that you can submit panelist questions through the app. Now, I would like to start this discussion with a topic that transcends political value systems, namely climate change. Research indicates that democratic systems generally are more conducive to fostering innovation through freedom, competition, and strong institutions. While autocratic systems, of course, can also foster innovation in certain cases, there are limitations, and they do more likely hinder long-term innovation potential. Among your responsibilities as Equinor, Jannicke, are sustainability and the company's energy transition plan. Given the tremendous need for innovation, for continuous innovation, in order for the world to transition to a more green and sustainable way of living, do autocracies pose an existential threat to our common future? And what role can companies like Equinor play in mitigating that risk?
Yeah, first of all, I must say it's a pleasure to be here today. It's a very important topic that's been addressed. Really enjoyed the earlier session also today. Part of my responsibility is then the energy transition plan in Equinor. And I think also with the war, we have also seen that energy can be weaponized. And it's also highlighting the need for energy in short term and long term. But in the long term, we need much more greener energy. We need more solar, more wind, more hydrogen, and so on. And where can we do that best in a way across the globe? And of course, we see that the technology is needed to bring this forward. And Equinor, we have sort of the ambitions to be a leading energy company in a just and also very inclusive transition. And for us, that also means that working together with the people, the employee, the government, but also with the local communities and suppliers and sub-suppliers, because we do care in a way how we make a positive impact where we have operation. With here in Europe, we have the Green Deal. In the US, we have the Inflation Reduction Act. And with this kind of stimulation, it's also helping quite a lot of technology development, because we do need to ramp up the energy shift to more greener energy, and we need to do it rapidly. And then we also need the stimulations that we see more often in democratic countries than in other countries. Yeah.
I hear the word engagement there, so engagement with autocracies to actually try and progress. Carsten, I know that in the case of CentralNic, you very much believe in technology for good, technology as a tool for fostering democracy, not only defending democracy, but also fostering it, and that technology should be available to all. And you do engage also, I know, from a business perspective with autocracies for that reason. Now, how do you balance today's geopolitical reality and the business decision-making? Do you have a framework that you apply to draw your own dividing lines, and what are the considerations that go into that?
Yeah, so we provide a few of the components of internet enablement, like things like domain names or online presence. So for us, it's very important that we are also part of autocracies that are evolving into democracies and helping that process. So that would be our first categorizations of autocracies that we work with, people where we believe that we still are giving something good by being present in that country, for example. The second category would be countries where there is a sanctions or other things disabling us from actually working with them. So that it's a no-brainer in a sense, because we can't really work with them. And here we are also looking at different sanctions around the world. So it might be that we are not particularly under a US sanction, but we still uphold these kind of sanctions in those jurisdictions. And then the last category is rather new for us. It's where we as a company basically take a stand and say, no, there's no real sanctions, for example, with the Russia-Belarus situation right now. There's no real sanctions that are prohibiting us to continue doing business as normal. But we have chosen as a company to not do so, basically.
Wolfgang, 1 year ago, nearly at the Copenhagen Democracy Summit, you said that, and I quote, "German business has written off Russia for years to come." At the time, the Democracy Perception Index data showed that 55% of Germans surveyed thought that you, or German business rather, should cut economic ties with Russia due to the war in Ukraine, whereas 26% said it shouldn't. A year on, that data, recently released, has started shifting a little bit. 50% still saying yes to cutting ties with Russia, but now nearly a third, 32%, saying no to cutting economic ties with Russia. Are German businesses still as determined on that writing off of Russia for years to come, as you mentioned a year ago, and as willing to defend democracy to the same extent? And perhaps taking a slightly negative outlook, if that trend that we see in the DPI continues, how does German business navigate that going forward? What practical steps will it need to take to make sure that that gap doesn't widen between the business decision makers and the population, which I assume also includes employees of those businesses?
Yeah, thank you. I remember well the pressure last year when I was telling the audience that yes, we are 100% backing all these sanctions, with the exception of the first year cut of the gas supply. Otherwise, we wouldn't have survived. But now, after 1 year, we have delivered. Yes, there might be a slight fatigue in a broader sense in the population, but that's not true for business. We are really sticking to our commitment to cut off all these business ties. We are delivering. The big brands are anyway out. It was complicated for some of our member companies to sell or simply write off all their investments, but they are well on track, and we are down by more than 2/3 meanwhile. And this will continue. So I would strictly and clearly confirm my last year's announcement. We are writing off the Russia business in general.
And do you see a change in the management of internal stakeholders over the last year, given the sentiment might be a little bit different on the, let's say, the factory floor?
I don't think we had such problems to explain what we are doing on the factory floor. It's really more a broader political debate, not within our companies. There are always some exceptions. So we are representing 100,000 companies. So there will be always a few with a different opinion. But in general, I think I'm pretty clear that this is not the biggest issue we face.
Carsten, CentralNic decided to halt all new sales to Russia. That was a decision taken by management. at the time, but not without a multitude of stakeholders to consider. And some concerns, I believe, were raised internally also last year when this was decided. So switching off business perhaps isn't as easy as exactly that switching off. It's not black and white. There are enormous amounts of complexities. Can you talk us through the stakeholder considerations that need to be factored in, whether it's Russia or any other country for that matter?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the management team was on top of this, ideally. So that was the initial discussions. But we also included a lot of our employees and even some of our key customers in these considerations. They also had a lot of questions about what is going to happen now. So involving them as part of as an input to this decision, which was made rather quickly in March last year. Yeah.
Jannicke, Equinor operates in 30 countries around the world with varying degrees of democracy ratings, we can probably fairly say. You were quick to announce, within days, I believe, of the invasion of Ukraine, that you were exiting Russia, and you have now completed that exit. That was an extraordinary situation, of course, and perhaps not something you can share all details of, but what generally guides you as a company in decision-making when dealing with countries that aren't as high on the democracy index, perhaps, as Norway? And what checks and balances are applied when engaging with autocracies?
I think most of all the values that we have in a company is guiding us. It's easy to remember for all of us. It's by being open, it's by being caring, it's by collaborating and also being courageous. And this is actually helping us on a day-to-day basis, but also when we have difficult decisions. So in a way the decision to exit Russia was difficult, but it was also very easy. It was difficult because of our people in the country, people working for us, everybody supporting the activity, has been working for this for 20, 30 years. So it was difficult in that area, but it was very easy because what was happening with the invasion of Ukraine is nothing that we would like to contribute to. So we decided very early. So the board of directors in Equinor actually decided the 28th of February to not do any more investment and also to start the process on exit. It is easy to do the decision business-wise, and then it's difficult because we need to protect the people that are working there. They will also continue to live in the country. And that's similar that we see all other countries where we decide to exit. It is about also protecting the people.
And of course, protecting the people is one thing, then protecting democracy and human rights more generally is a popular question here from the audience. You know, how do you balance your responsibilities as head of sustainability on the one hand, and then of course your commitments to shareholders on the other? It is a very, very difficult balance.
It can be a difficult balance, but I think what we have learned is that we need to set the standard of how we would like to do business. And based on that, we have, in a way, the people that would like to invest together with us. So I'm not saying it's all easy, because it isn't. It's a lot of difficult decisions. And if you look at the activity level, our activity is to continue with oil and gas, but reducing the emission. And then it's about ramping up quite a lot on renewable and low carbon solutions. But to do that, we need to build quite a lot, in a way. So we do depend on yards across the world. And some of these yards are not in the countries where we would like them to be. And then it's about how can we work together with the yards, with the suppliers and the sub-suppliers to make sure that we have the human rights standard that we would like to do. And of course, then it's very often about being early in, having the dialogue, but also to put more money on the table so that the living wages could be like we mean it should be, that the sort of the decent working relationship for all the people working in the supply chain. But it's a lot of dilemmas, but back to the values that are actually helping us, and also to very high ethical standards.
Not an insignificant role to play there. Now let's discuss relations with China as well. Decoupling from China has been mentioned frequently over the last year. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, however, rather speaks of de-risking, pointing out that decoupling from China is neither viable for nor in the interest of Europe. Now, how do we get a new business relationship with China right? Wolfgang, German business has a lot of at stake in China. You have previously spoken about moving away from dependency on China, but also yourself warned against decoupling. What are your views on how we devise a de-risked business relationship with China that works?
Yeah, your wording that we are in a balancing act, in a very difficult balancing act, is absolutely appropriate. BDI, our association, has published a paper already on China in 2019 where we said it is a systemic rival and we cannot close our eyes and shy away from addressing it. So now we are in this phase where we have this famous triangle of cooperation and competition on a level playing field, but also conflict, systemic rivalry. And that is a balancing act. And our answer is, of course, not decoupling, because we still want to cooperate with China in normal, non-sensitive trade and investment relations. It's no problem to sell cars in China or to buy toys. When it comes to sensitive issues, high-tech, critical infrastructure, we have to balance it already. Then we are competitors in our own markets, on third markets, and we need to strive for a global level playing field. A lot of problems with China because they don't play along the rules. And the third one is, of course, the most complicated. We have to address and cannot shy away from these political issues. Of course, the German business community is not accepting that China has a very problematic stance on the Russian-Ukraine attack. We are addressing it. Of course we have a problem what happened in Hong Kong. Of course we are seeing what is going on in Xinjiang. And we talk about it and we don't shy away. And that is a balancing act. And yeah, and I can also confirm this wording, which is good, that we do not longer talk about decoupling, but de-risking, and we call it de-risking by diversification. So we open up for new partners all over the world, in our old markets, but also emerging markets in Africa, Southeast Asia, or Latin America. That's the concept to do the balancing act.
Jannicke, Carsten, are you working to de-risk your Chinese business relations? And if so, how?
Yeah, we are. A little bit similar. It's about de-risking in a way to find alternative routing, alternative sourcing. For a period, we tried to do oil and gas activity, being an operator partnership in China, but that's many years ago since we said that this is not working for us. And similar within renewables, we had a period that we, in a way, were exploring the opportunity to work together, and we decided that was not for our company. But then, of course, we do depend on some of the value chain within solar industry. It's difficult these days to find alternative material, and very sort of positive to see the work going on in EU also, to see how can we make a value chain that can compete with some of the Chinese value chain. How can we work together in Europe and US with other countries to find alternative sort of value chain. But of course it is a balancing act. These days in Norway you can't buy a router at your home without being a Chinese equipment. So in a way we do depend, and then it's about working together to find alternatives. And I think that's, yeah, we can see that's growing, the need for that. And I think also the situation with the war here in Europe is showing that we were too dependent on oil and gas from Russia. And then we also see that we need to look into all kinds of value chains, not to be depending on one country, but have the alternatives.
Carsten, they are a technology giant, of course. Any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, so from our side, we're not present as such in China. Of course, we sell Chinese domain names. We sell European and global domain names to China as well. We are ramping up also, especially on the information security side, where we see a lot of fraud coming out of China. So we are ramping up and preparing for those kind of things, absolutely. And I think also we as a company is becoming a little bit more political in the sense that we now understand that we can very quickly take a stance if something something more sinister is going to happen, right? So.
And so thinking ahead in dreadful scenarios, something more sinister, if China did attack Taiwan, would there be the same business willingness to cut ties as we saw last year? We touched a little bit on it earlier this morning when we saw the data from the DPI. And according to that, citizens of most major democracies would favor that. But of course, the results are a little bit more mixed looking at the sentiment in less free countries. What are your quick answers? Is it a yes or a no, or is it much more complex than that again?
Yeah, it's of course much more complex, but we are in a preparation already. We see what's going on. We listen to what we hear from China. The companies are getting more and more political. The companies have their own responsibility. It's not that the companies are just sit and wait, tell us what to do if. We are preparing. Our association itself, we have a working group of Taiwan Foresight. So every couple of weeks we sit together and discuss a certain part of the possible problem. That does not mean that we are really looking forward to it. We could do everything to prevent the situation, but if so, better be prepared than sorry.
Yeah, similar with us. Let's hope it never happens, but of course we need to be prepared. So we have this discussion internally and also with the partners that we're working together with, so that we will have a plan and be able to act.
And on that point, Jannicke, if I may, transparency, right, is also something that we're discussing a lot here. As the Washington Post aptly says, democracy dies in darkness. Now, companies such as yours, you do a lot, as we can hear. You do a lot, whether it's preparation or the actual actions taken when it comes to decision making that impacts human rights and freedoms. But more often than not, such actions are reported on either in a very general terms or not reported on at all, or relatively vague. And that's perhaps understandable given security implications for staff, for the operations themselves. That said, is more transparency and reporting a way forward? More openness about the actions taken, about these working groups, about the preparations, so that we create not only more awareness, but also perhaps call out the autocratic behavior and the challenges that businesses are dealing with. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely believe that transparency is helping us. There will, of course, be issue deep domain knowledge on the cyber. You have talked about that we won't share, but I think within almost all other kind of areas we should share more. And within human rights, I think being very transparent in what we are working on, what we are improving, and also be very open that it's not 100%, because even though we set a sort of, this is the minimum level of living standards, this is the minimum this is the minimum wages, we should not have any sign-off fee. We do see that happened down in our value chain. So then we should be open about it and together work to mitigate it. And we actually have seen very positive changes what we have shared up to now, but I think also will help even more if we are able to report more of the same. Because if Equinor is reporting something and your company is reporting something, it's not that easy to compare and in a way learn from each other.
So a standardization of the reporting.
Much more standardization would help us.
And we were touching on this a little bit last year. I do remember, Wolfgang, we talked about whether it should be an ESG metric in itself, a much stronger one than it currently is. Carsten?
Absolutely, and I think there's also a role to play for organizations like corporate organizations to help the companies in this area, because it is a new space for many companies to actually operate within this. So what is an autocracy, and when is the line, right? So where can we define the line? So it's not what the companies does normally, right? We're a technology company. We are not in those circles, so to speak, from a day-to-day point of view.
And on that point, actually, the European Council of Foreign Relations has recently been highlighting that sanctions can proliferate without being effective and actually distort global markets. And they therefore call for formulation by the EU of a common sanctions doctrine defining for the future goals, capabilities, but also thresholds for applying sanctions. Is that something that you would welcome then as a business?
Absolutely. So the more steering from the political world that is supposed to decide these things, right? The better from our point of view, right? So in that, especially when we are talking about these edge cases where we are talking, are we doing sanctions or not? I think obviously for us it's easier if Russia was sanctioned in the IT space, it would be an easy decision, right?
I see some question marks here, Wolfgang?
Yes, of course, we need regulation and we need certain standards, but we put the emphasis on corporate responsibility and we believe in that. And if you listen to your and other companies reporting, yes, there might be some differences, but still it's in your own hands. The danger is if the European Commission and our national governments create a bureaucratic monster, then it's perhaps even a disadvantage. Then you leave certain countries where you want to diversify because you don't want to cope with all these bureaucracies and the liabilities perhaps. And that's what we hear from our partner countries, from Kenya, from Brazil. They say, well, these corporate CSDDD, corporate sustainability due diligence is very complicated, the name. And once you enter into this bureaucracy, it really gets a burden, and that does not help in diversifying, and it's not welcomed by the target countries in Africa. So it's again a balancing act. Regulation, yes, but not too much bureaucracy behind it. No.
Now there is increased talk about friendshoring. Having your friends on your team only, manufacturing and sourcing from countries that are geopolitical allies. Is that a concept that makes sense to you then, given that you're also very much promoting engagement? And do you see a bifurcated business world between democracies and autocracies taking shape as the future?
Yes, it's an inconvenient truth, but yes, there will be a kind of a bipolar world. Some people, of course, try to avoid this term and prefer to talk about a multipolar world. But what we have seen, I just come back from Japan, from the B7 summit hosted by Japan, and what we see is that we need solidarity among the liberal societies, the Western, and then when we are united on that, we need to reach out to the Global South and make a better offer compared to autocratic competitors. So if we go to the Arabic world or Africa or Latin America, let's do the better offer as democrats, and then let's compete with autocrats and let's see who is more attractive. That is the concept. But the first step is solidarity among ourselves.
Jannicke, you touched on values, purpose. Of course, a lot of that also needs leadership. Now, you have all, over the last year, year and a half, navigated a whole new reality. Lots of lessons learned from that. But if we look at it, there is no playbook yet for this new reality. The case studies are still to be written to an extent. Government relations and leadership courses at universities haven't quite caught up yet. So how do you ensure within your organizations that the next generation of leaders can learn from your experiences over the last year and develop or continue to develop a leadership culture that really defends and fosters democracy and lives by those values?
Oh, that was a big question. I think a little bit back to probably some of the basics, really understanding that the values and the ethical standard in the company are helping us on a day-to-day basis, but also very much about scenario thinking. So we had a big group working with a potential war in Ukraine. What can we do? What scenario could come up? How could that affect our business long before it happened? I think that scenario thinking is something that's coming stronger and stronger, so that we do prepare and really understand the risk and also in a way agreeing on what kind of risk are we willing to take for the company, because it's, as you touched upon earlier, it's about protecting the people and the environment, but also shareholders. But scenario thinking is really coming up for the new generation also, but being very sort of transparent and open and willing to share.
I deeply believe in Generation Y, the millennials. They care on ecological and social human rights standards a lot, and we are in a competition to get them on board. If you do not offer a value-based proposition as a company or institution, you don't get the brightest minds on board. So that's where we are.
A positive outlook to finish on, perhaps. So with that engagement, Carsten, as you said, values and the next generation of leadership is hopefully what will see us continue to both defend and foster democracy. Thank you all very much for participating.
Thank you.